Hello and welcome to Cases Closed. This is actually the first time we've ever done this type of show slash episode slash video slash training. Whatever this ends up being, it's the first time we've done it.
We're glad you're here.
We're glad you're here. Yes, we are. I am Sam Carlson. This is my good buddy, Dr. Chad Woolner. And we are here with Dr. Luis Del Rio. Luis, thanks for coming, buddy.
Yeah, definitely. Thanks for having me.
Yeah. And so today, the goal of the conversation here is to kind of shed a little bit more light on an offer that Dr. Luis, Dr. Del Rio has been having success with, which is the Thermography Neuropathy Offer. Okay. So I'm going to give a little bit of context of what that is, how it works, and then hopefully we can have a cool discussion on the success you're seeing and how you did it. Sound good?
Sounds good.
Cool. So I guess the first thing is what are we going to be talking about today? So we have an offer inside of Patient Stream that is a click and go campaign. It's based around folks who have neuropathy. Okay. And the hook is to offer them a diagnostic via the use of a thermal scan camera. Okay. And the whole idea is, hey, we call them self-discovery offers. So basically you can find out about how far progressed in this case is your neuropathy, how extreme is your dysfunction, in terms of you can see it visually with, a hot and cold image. So that is how we are finding and getting leads. But then the question comes to, okay, well, we're getting leads. That's great. How do we now take those leads and ultimately convert them into patients? And that's a process, right? You actually had a cool little phrase that I want you to maybe share a little bit before we get into the discussion. And hopefully we'll frame some of the solutions that people can find around this idea. So you called it what did you call it?
The nuances of niches.
That's true. The nuances of niches. What is that?
Or niches, for those who want to pronounce them as niches, which weirdos. The idea is that to think that there is a one-size-fits-all approach to every niche under the sun out there is very highly unrealistic. And the reason why is because with each niche comes, let's look at it from a realistic standpoint. With each niche, you're typically going to find a certain amount of divergence in terms of a demographic and or even perhaps a psychographic there as well that you need to take into consideration. And with that comes a different set of a different context in terms of beliefs, in terms of circumstances, in terms of the way that they inherently tend to think.
Yeah.
You're talking about different audiences. And so to try and apply, if let's say hypothetically, I was talking to a group of moms, I wouldn't talk to them the same way as a group of guys.
Yeah.
Right. That should make perfect sense.
It's a very basic example, right?
Exactly.
Like neuropathy, people who have neuropathy as opposed to people who suffer from joint pain.
Correct.
Okay. Things along those lines.
Yeah.
So there's nuances in the niches, and to kind of tee this thing up for Dr. Del Rio, you have found your nuance on how you convert the neuropathy niche in the context of this thermographic scan offer. So, and I should note also, you're largely the reason why that thermography offer I don't know if you know, I think you do, why that thermography offer got put into Patient Stream. I'd heard about it before, but I mean, geez, got so many things going on. It's not always, top of mind what new offers we can create when we have things that are working. But you brought that to me saying, hey, we're having great success. We've put that now into Patient Stream so people can access it at the click of a couple buttons. And we're seeing not just Dr. Del Rio having that level of success getting leads, but also him, of course, and other users. So, Luis, I'll turn it over to you. I don't know how well I teed this up, but why don't you kind of start us off with that offer and what you're doing to have so much success there?
Sure. So the whole gist of the offer really is to get them in for that thermal scan to see how the blood is flowing into their hands and feet. And for most of these patients, it's into their feet. And it's a really cool graphic that they can see, because what I've noticed as you were talking about, Chad, the different nuances with neuropathy, what I've noticed is that it's a slower sales process. It seems to be a little longer sales process. So what works really well is showing them pictures, not being as detailed and going into the science of neuropathy, but the thermal scan itself and the Toronto severity exam, and sort of going over that so that they can feel how bad their pain is, because that is really important in this specific niche.
Okay. So let's kind of go to maybe take this in chronological order, right? Because I think you're absolutely right. There's a process. There's a demographic here. They have a longer sales cycle and or conversion cycle. Let's start out with some of the tips and the approaches that are nuanced. You get a lead. Let's start there. What are some of the keys to getting leads to show and getting them into practice?
Right. Yeah. So the big thing with leads, obviously, is you got to get them from that point of being interested to being committed. And that's the first sales process, because everybody that clicks on a Facebook lead, as everyone knows, is interested in the picture that they see, and they click on that. But a lot of the time, if you do not nurture this right, and you do not really focus on the patient and getting things out to them, that's all they'll be. And you want them to be committed enough to schedule an appointment and then actually show up for the appointment. So that's the first sales process, that interested to committed to get into the office. So how do you do that? One of the things that we do is really obviously try to reach out to the lead as quickly as possible. That's step one. And then the other thing is which is great about Patient Stream, is that you can text them, right? And you can text them in real time, so you can go back and forth with them. And the other great thing about the patient lead, that portal is that, or your platform, is that you have the templates. So you can really, there's going to be a lot of questions that are similar, and a lot of things that you're asking the potential patient. So you can template that out. So it really cuts down on your time. So you don't have to rethink every time they're asking a question. You can just go to the template, put it in, it answers it for them. So that's a big part of it. And then once you get them down to the questions that they're asking, then really the next thing that we've noticed, and we sort of just started this a little while ago, and it's worked really well, and we're basically expanding on this, is getting videos over to them, and letting them see that process. And really the main videos that you want, that we feel works the best, is one, an authority video, right? To tell them why they should pick you versus somebody else. And then sort of an intro video, sort of showing them about the office, the tools that you work with, maybe the thermal scan, PEMF, as we were talking about, whatever you use to treat it, to pique their interest. And then obviously a testimonial video, so that they see that this works with other patients. And then, you know, there's other videos mixed into there, but those three seem to be the most that we get the best feedback from. And then obviously getting the team on the same page so that they can book that appointment, get them in. And that's really the hardest part of that cycle, I think, especially with Facebook, and especially with everything else that's going on, you know, in 2020, getting through all the clutter, is that interested to committed phase.
I think there's a really huge key that you just gave docs that they need to hear loud and clear. And I hope that they are paying attention to what you said there. And if not, I'm going to, you know, circle back on that, because what you just shared there, I think, is one of the greatest keys, and also one of the greatest misnomers or misunderstandings that docs have. We hear a lot about lead quality, don't we?
Oh, yes.
Right.
The quality of the leads isn't good. And I will, for the sake of playing devil's advocate or whatever, I will agree and say, you know what, you're right. Lead quality isn't great. You know, oftentimes it isn't. But what they need to understand is this: it is your responsibility to change that, to create or increase or enhance the quality of those leads. And it doesn't just happen by you pestering them to come in for an appointment. What you said there was key, in that there is a nurturing process that needs to take place. And the term that I would use is pre-framing. You know, that we've got a podcast, and we had this experience 2 or 3 weeks ago. We had a patient who just signed up for our knee program. And he said to us twice, unsolicited. He said to us twice. He came in for his initial appointment, and in passing, just casually, he said, "Yeah, I saw your podcast, and I really liked what you guys had to say." So like my ears perked up, and I'm like, "That's a clue." And then he came in for the second appointment, day 2, for his report of findings. And he said right before we went into like the actual, consult room where we, closed everything, he said, "I really liked your podcast." Again, unsolicited.
Yeah.
Ding, ding, ding. Okay. So this guy has come through pre-framed as a result of that. And that was something, to be totally honest, I would think that I would like have the answer like, "Oh yeah, that was totally intentional." I mean, yes, we knew that the podcast has that ability to do that, but now it's like we realized, and so long story short, it was one of the easiest cases to close ever. He was just like, "Yep,
Right.
here we go. I just need to sign up. Okay, great, let's do this."
Right.
And he signed up, and the point is that the term that I used that we are going to use is, we're going to call it the podcast pre-frame, where it's like every lead is going to be sent a couple episodes of our podcast that'll be the most relevant, the most useful, and that'll help establish our credibility and authority, like you said. It's huge.
So
anyways.
Luis, were you, so these videos that you're sending them, are these automated now into patient stream, or are you guys just kind of manually sending them those? How are you doing that?
Right. Not yet. That's
okay.
The next step is to get them automated so that they're just sent to them, similar to other stuff you guys send. You sometimes you had sent emails in the past, things like that, but getting that automated. But first, you obviously want them to get to know a little bit about it through the text. Obviously that works best. I'd say 90% of our patients respond to text, where nobody picks up the phone nowadays, so that's tough. So the texting has really changed the number of people that actually respond back to us, and go from there.
And just kind of something maybe that we've seen on our end that is really important, and maybe you could speak to this, Luis, is that texting by itself is important to have its own nuance. And again, you're in Florida, right?
Right.
Okay. So Florida, while I'll give some some feedback on this, it will be different in Florida than it is here in Meridian, Idaho, than it is in Seattle, Washington. They'll all be a little different. But one of the things I've noticed is when you're engaging somebody via text, okay, so they come in as a lead, you have your automated sequence go out, and they respond.
Right.
The first goal you want to go for is to get them scheduled. Like, hey, can we get you scheduled? But what I am leaning people more towards now these days, instead of like, because to me a schedule is a commitment, right? So instead of committing them first, I'm trying to engage / relate to them first. Okay, which means, hey, Chad, thank you so much for giving us this much of your trust. Before we go any further, can I learn a little bit more about your knee pain or your neuropathy or whatever it is? And just trying to engage and reframe the conversation around the problem, and ask them a couple questions, even if it's on text or phone. Either case, it's the same thing. And just try and go for hey, let's frame this around your problem with me asking you questions. And then at some point, okay, great. Based on what you've said, I think what we're offering is a perfect fit. Let's get you in for an appointment. Do you have you found that? Have you done anything like that, Luis? As far, I'm having a hard time. It's not saying Luis. Sorry about that, Luis. But have you done anything like that, or do you find going straight for the commitment in your market works just fine?
Yeah. So we used to go straight for the schedule the appointment, and what I've noticed over the last 6 months of really going towards this more texting model is less is more. So meaning that don't get too detailed in the question, or too lengthy, because texting is such a informal thing for the most part. So if you consider it more of you talking to a friend and asking, oh, how long have you had this knee pain, or things like that, it's much better than going into the science or a long salesy text message. And asking, what I've noticed, 3 questions. If you get 3 responses, then you can go in for the schedule the appointment. And I feel like that has worked out the best.
And it's funny, if you want a way for your show up rate to be terrible, let them ask questions and answer them.
Right.
And
Right.
because, and you talked about it, and I think Dr. Del Rio, you talked about it too. If you give too much information up front, it's not going to mean the same thing.
Right.
They're not going to frame it around their problem. It has to be, the conversation has to be surrounded, like in the context again of their problem. And so yeah, get some responses and then say, great. Based on what you've told me, I think we're a perfect fit for what your problem is. Let's get you scheduled. What day works best? Monday, whatever. Give them some options and then move forward from there. Cool. All right. So let's kind of move in, because I get questions on how do you even tactically present the results of their scan and things along those lines. So they're in the practice. Okay. They're in the clinic. Talk to me about best practices, kind of some of the benchmarks that you're doing in that order to get them, converted to care.
So the two main things that we use is the thermal scan and then the severity exam, the Toronto severity exam. Obviously, having their spouse there increases your close rate or your enrollment rate astronomically, just because of the fact that, one, they have somebody else to listen to, because we got to remember a lot of these patients are on gabapentin, which we know slows down brain function. So if you get too
That's
complicated,
interesting.
you get too complicated early on in there, they sort of lose focus and they can't absorb everything you're saying. So having somebody else in the room is good. And then obviously, as everybody knows, they don't have to say, oh, I got to go talk to my spouse about it, or whatever their outlet is there. But going back to the thermal scan, we have a normal thermal scan, which is going to show up with bright colors, right? You want the white or yellow or red, and then as blood flow decreases, it goes into the greens and the purples and darker colors. So you want them to see that, your toes are supposed to be this color, but now they're this color, so they can visually see that. And then the great thing about the severity exam, especially if the spouse is there, you can do the test and then the spouse sees it and is like, wow, you don't feel that? And you're sticking with a pinprick. And then you do the same thing to the spouse, that you feel how this feels. And then now they're sold on that. They're like, wow, you cannot feel that. They don't understand what, or they don't, since they're living with them, I guess they don't really know how bad it is. So getting that visual effect really pretty much closes the sale right there. So that's those two big things, I think, really change it for the spouse, because they're investing in this too. So you have to get their buy-in. And I think that's a big thing that a lot of people miss.
That is, I've never heard that before. I've heard about having the spouse there, but I've never heard, hey, take off your shoe. Try this real quick. You see, your spouse can't feel this. That's concerning. And Dr. Gill, he's always like, that's concerning. That's not okay. Right. And again, people won't look for an actual solution until they sense the reality of the real problem, of the actual problem. So those are some really good. Are you using the Seek One? What are you using as a camera?
So when I started, I was using the actual camera, but the screen is rather small on that one. So what we've moved to now is the one that you add on to the iPad, and the screen, obviously the picture's way bigger and it just gives a better effect, and they get to see it. Obviously.
And is the camera quality the same?
Yeah, we haven't. I mean, it's virtually the same.
Okay.
Yeah.
And it's cheaper. Like I think the Seek One is like $500, and that attachment, isn't it like $130?
Yeah, it is cheaper. If you have an iPad, then it's makes sense. Obviously, if you have to buy the iPad and the device, maybe not.
Sure. I like that. That's an objective and a subjective diagnostic in the same visit, which, as you know, I mean, we talk about this all the time. In order for people buy based on emotion first. Okay.
Right.
And the diagnostic is going to give an objective, like a logical visual representation of what the dysfunction is. But at the same time, the subjective / emotional thing, if you see that's a normal foot, that's my foot, that is like an emotional, that's
Yeah, anytime you can simplify things
Yes.
in terms of color coding, red equals bad, green equals good, you know what I mean?
Right.
True.
It makes them quote unquote getting it a lot easier.
Yeah.
So
Right.
much more simple.
Awesome.
So
So I love even some of the tricks that you're talking about for the exam. Now, when we move, and I also like the term you use, enrollment, because that's what we're doing. I mean, I always do kind of struggle with this word closing because I don't like
Right.
what it implies. But the reality is what we're doing here is we're trying to get new patients to convert to care. So I like what you called, patient enrolling. I like that. Let's talk about that process for you. What are some of the the benchmarks, the things that you're striving for in that process?
So the way we do it in our offices is we have first either the nurse practitioner or the doctor see them. No, actually, before they see that, they actually see our case manager, what we call our patient experience manager, and they go over a little bit about their history, sort of try to see if they're a good fit for what, if they've tried this stuff before, if whatever they've done, and we get that done first, and then the practitioner comes in, right, and sees them, and then we compile all the data, take the thermal scan, do the neuropathy severity exam, and then we have them come back for day 2, where we actually go over the process of what their thermal scan is, what their exam findings are, and then usually the doctor does that, and then the patient experience manager, which they met the last time they were there, so they're familiar with them, comes in and enrolls them for treatment. And I've noticed that works the best. We used to do it, we've tried it, like everybody probably has tried it 50 different ways, and that process works best for us. And I think the process, that the reason it works so well is because they're familiar with the person that is now presenting their finances. And I think that raises the percentages up.
Yeah. You obviously run your own practice. After hearing that process, anything, I don't know, I kind of know what you guys do, but anything you like or want to add to that
no,
process?
I like the, at the end of the day, the one thing I've come to learn is that, again, there is no one size fits all in
Mhm.
terms of
Right.
this process. That being said, I would say in general, I think the thing that, if we were to pull back from a mile up and look at it, I think you hit the nail on the head there, that the more that you can develop rapport with not just because again, I think that's the thing, docs feel like the rapport needs to be with the doc and only the doc. And the
Right.
reality of it is the rapport has to be collectively with the entity itself. That means everyone. Everyone that's going to be involved in any way, shape, or form with that patient's experience needs to be developing some level of connection and rapport with that patient, and particularly whoever's going to be handling finances, so that there's a certain level of trust. And so it's almost, what I'm hearing, and correct me if I'm wrong, Lewis, but it's almost as though the patient experience manager, coordinator, whatever you said, that patient experience manager
Right.
is the one that's facilitating the whole process. That's the constant throughout the whole, that's the kind of common denominator throughout all of it, is that individual, whoever it is kind of facilitating and orchestrating the whole moving parts, right? Okay, now Dr. Lewis is going to come in and talk to you. Now our nurse practitioner, is going to come
Exactly.
in and talk to you. Now so-and-so, okay, and that just, they're facilitating from start to finish and orchestrating that whole process and that whole flow, so that that's the constant that's developing that relationship with him, so that when it comes time for the finances, it's a far more, my guess is, a far more organic conversation than this heavily scripted, cold and sterile, algorithm that's all based off of like cheesy 1980s car sales tactics and strategies. If patient says XYZ, respond with 1, 2, 3, instead it's just this like, look, we've got a relationship here. We know that you need help. It's obvious. That too. What do we need to do to get together and make this happen?
Yeah.
Yeah,
Like,
no doubt about it. They're one of the most important pieces in the offices, because, like you said, they're building rapport. they're building motivation, they're building the value of the case, and then they're coming in and enrolling the patient. So they're there at every process. And even further, a lot of the times they're on a phone call with the patient beforehand if they have any questions before that. Or when COVID was at its height a couple months back and patients didn't really want to leave the house, we did that same patient experience manager was doing all the phone consultations. So extremely important in our practice, piece of the puzzle there for sure.
So in my experience, there's a lot of tactical things. And you said like ABC and 1, 2, 3. Like, I think there are some tactical phrases
sure,
that can help you, but, and I'll actually share a couple of those here in a second, but I wonder, there's two foundational principles that I feel like kill conversions faster than anything else. And one is clarity,
or lack thereof.
or I'm sorry, lack of clarity,
Yeah.
and lack of certainty.
Yeah.
Okay. Lack of clarity, meaning you're either advancing the conversation too quickly, not enough education. You talked about, when we started, Dr. Del Rio, you talked about that sales cycle, that sales / education cycle is longer. So
Right.
let's talk real quick about lack of clarity. Have you made it a point? I don't know if you've identified it as that, or if you just know that, hey, we have to educate. Let's talk about that first. The education / clarity process. How have you integrated that into your, starting cold and then converting or enrolling at the end?
Yeah, well, the big thing, that the hurdle that we have with neuropathy is that their doctor that they've always went to and have their trust has told them that you can't treat neuropathy. It's untreatable. You're going to have this forever.
Yeah.
So now you have that hurdle to jump over, right? And the only way to do that is, one, build trust, and two, show them that you care about the process and how you have figured out how to fix it. And that's where the videos come in, because saying it is one thing, but video is so important. And them seeing you, your staff, and then seeing what you do to actually try to help them, and then get the testimonials on the back end that says, hey, I didn't trust this either. A testimonial that we have that's super powerful is, my doctor said this wasn't treatable, and then I came here and this happened. And those are the things that you can't say that yourself, especially early on, and the patient actually believe it. You have to build out that cycle, and that's why it's a little bit of a slower process, because that's not the case with knee pain. With another one of our niches there, knee pain, people understand that it's treatable. If you have a certain issue, you can treat it. So we don't have to jump over that huge hurdle that the expert that I usually go to already said, I'm going to have this forever. You have to jump over that. And if you do not address that, you're not going to enroll 3 days later.
Yeah, that's one of the things that, Sonny said to me a long time ago, confusion is the enemy to closing, right? Anything confusing or anything that is not handled prior to. And that's why, again, niches and nuances, you need to know that the nuance that you just gave a perfect example. A lot of these people come in with the fixed idea that this is unfixable. Like, you can't change this. And if you go too quickly past that point, the reason it has nothing to do with quality of lead, it has nothing to do with all of these things you think it is. It's the fact that you didn't take enough time to find out, are we clear? Are you educated? Do you have any unresolved doubts?
Well, and again, the thing that I would point out, maybe you're going to get to this, is that people are not going to say, I'm confused.
Right.
They're not going to say that. Yeah. That's the thing. You got to be better at detecting cues. They're going to give you subtle clues, hints, and cues that will let you know that they're confused. Case in point, let me go home and think about it.
Yes.
Right.
That's a I'm confused statement. Or let me talk this over with my spouse. Or can I take this home and look this over? Those are all things, those are all ways of them basically saying, and you got to think about it from their perspective. They're not going to say I'm confused. You know why? Because it makes them look stupid.
Yeah.
Right.
What do you mean you're confused? Do you not get this, moron? Like that's, and granted, I understand docs aren't going to say that to their patients, but you got to understand, like, patients are going to give themselves an out and not say they're confused, but in reality, and it may be something as simple, it might be something super, super simple, nothing too terrible, like, oh, I didn't realize that you could you could do, payment arrangements or, whatever. I didn't
Yeah.
realize, oh, I thought you meant that I was going to have to do this for the next 10 years. I didn't realize this was just going to be a, whatever it could be, you know what I mean? It could be something
Right.
super simple. And so in terms of that, tactically speaking, docs have got to know how to detect when those clues are given,
Yeah.
that there's potential confusion.
Yeah.
And I would argue that I think it's, in many instances, I don't want to say it's impossible, but I would say it's quite common that even with your best job, there will still be some degree or level of potential confusion. And that's precisely why communication is key in terms of discovering any potential confusion, letting that pop up and then killing that confusion by creating clarification in terms of that.
Yeah. Dr. Del Rio, anything you want to add to that?
Yeah, for that, definitely the fact that confusion, that whole thing there, a confused patient never buys or a confused consumer never buys, is completely true. And what I find in the ROF, the report of findings, whatever you guys call it, is that lack of the patient asking questions. That's when I notice that there's something wrong here. When they're just looking at you and you're explaining something and they don't say anything, they're leaving without even, that was the confused look right there. And when they're not engaged in what you're saying or asking questions, you can totally, and I'm sure, Chad, you can vouch this too, you already know halfway through the ROF if this is going to be an enrollment or not, by how the patient is reacting to what you're saying. So that's
exactly right.
Yeah.
You know what's funny about that? A long time ago, like a year and a half ago, I was thinking about this exact process, and I was trying to figure out, how can you read this better? How can you, what are some cues to tune you into what's actually happening? And I came up with the 3D questions. Did I ever tell you this?
Yes.
Yeah. So there's questions that usually fall into one of these buckets: doubting, deflecting, and digging. Right? So doubting is like, oh, my doctor told me this, that, the other. That's not a problem, right? That's okay. A doubting person is a person who needs, like you said, Dr. Del Rio, videos, context, education. They need something to point to say, oh, here's a thread of hope, or here's a thread of this makes sense to me, right? Deflecting is, what was your thing? I need to go home to.
Yeah.
Whatever.
Can I go home and think about it?
Yeah, that's deflecting. Right. And then you just brought up a beautiful, segue. Digging is like, okay, well, how does it actually repair the cells, or how does this work? If they're asking digging questions, you are on the right track.
Yes, definitely.
Yeah. Well, and I would even say too, if they're asking doubting questions, that's not even necessarily a bad thing either. That case that closed so quickly for us, he had a handful, and you could just feel that he was closing. They call them buying questions, right? They're asking buying questions.
Right. Yeah.
And he was showing a slight degree of skepticism, a healthy amount, we'll call it that, a healthy degree of skepticism, which is totally cool, And the nice thing is, you brought up something that was important there, that maybe you're going to dig into this further, but it's the certainty. If you have certainty there, you'll welcome those types of skeptical questions all day long. It's totally, and that's the other thing too, is hopefully docs, if you're new at this, or if you're relatively new at this, hopefully you've tapped into protocols that you can lean on, that have proven themselves in other people's clinics, right? Because for us, it's like at the beginning when we were just getting started, that's what we had to rely on, was other people's experiences and or the protocols. Now that we've had enough experience, I can look any patient in the eyes right now and tell them, like, this is your best option. If you want to avoid surgery, I can promise you and we've worked really hard at our clinic to really create a proprietary system. We call it curating a solution. We've curated a solution that is better than anything else, because most of the places here in this valley, they offer maybe one or two of the different components of what we do, but not in the order and not in the way that we've done it in terms of the comprehensive nature. We have taken and we've crafted such a comprehensive solution, and the patients that go through the program get such good results that I can look them in the eyes and with absolute certainty let them know So those questions, the doubting, going back to that, the doubting questions don't rattle me because I've had enough experience, you know. So
I like that. And one thing on, it's funny because, you know, a real conversation about this topic would probably need to last 4 or 5 hours, which we don't have that time.
Right.
But you talked about ABC 1, 2, 3, and then you talk about borrowing other people's protocols until you kind of make it your own.
right.
There is a place for tactics. There is
Yeah.
a place for scripts, like knowing, for example, one of the things in the certainty vein that I try and share with people is a part of a script that says, Chad, based on what you've told us and what we found out about your condition, I think our program is a perfect fit. The words, the cadence, the way the tone kind of dips down, that all conveys certainty. Now, this is a phrase that I've used over and over and over again. I've taught it to people, and it's not manipulative. It's a starting point, right? It's a, hey, this starts you off on the right foot. So instead of, you know, having deflective questions follow your response of, hey, what would you like to do? It's more of, oh, he's certain.
Yeah.
Okay, that's what I needed, right?
Yeah.
And I don't know that we need to dig into certainty 100% just because we've kind of talked about that. But I guess, Dr. Del Real, I'll turn certainty to you. Is this something that you have made a point of in your process, or is this something that's come naturally? Or talk to me about its role right now in your success with this offer.
No, absolutely. That's something that you have to practice, because you have, the entire team has to be certain, not just the one
Yes.
providing
Right.
the actual enrollment process, because everybody's going to touch this patient at some point. So they all have to be. And the one thing we can't forget is that neuropathy, as you were saying, Chad, it is confusing to a patient, right? It's not. So you have to welcome those questions, because if they really want to enroll in treatment, they really have questions. It is a confusing topic. So there's a lot out there. And the main thing about the communication that you guys were talking about is that you have to remember is only 7% of our communication comes from the words that we say. 55% comes from our body language, and then 38% comes from the tone. So if you don't practice that with all the team members, you're really missing out, and you're only focusing on the words. You're talking, 93% is being lost. And that's huge for me.
The other thing that I would also bring up, and some team members may not like this, but it's just the cold hard truth, and the reality is, number one, clinics and docs and teams will say, need to understand there is a massive difference between pressure and tension. Number one, You don't want to pressure people. Pressure doesn't lead to sales. No one likes to feel pressured, but tension is a necessity. Right. And the difference between, I've explained this before, so if docs have heard anything that I teach about the difference between pressure and tension, they know already, but pressure is all about you, meaning I want a certain outcome. I don't care if it's in the patient's best interest or not. I'm going to get this outcome. And so
you're talking as you.
Yeah.
Like you're selling me.
Correct.
You're trying to pressure me. Your language is driven at me.
Correct.
Okay.
Yeah. It's like, I want a specific result. If it so happens that it's in the patient's best interest, great. If not, still doesn't matter. This is the outcome that we want. I'm going to do it. I'm going to put pressure on this patient to do it. Right. So be it. Again, it could be in their best interest. Not. It's all about this force thing. Tension, the difference, and I always draw it with arrows, right? Pressure is an arrow going this way, right? Tension is about setting up for the patient or helping them to create clarity, again, on the outcome that they are after, that they are sold on, and then helping to create the gap between where they're currently at, their current reality, versus the ideal reality of where they would like to be. And you need to let that marinate to a certain extent and be okay with that. And that boils down to a term, confrontational tolerance. And I think there needs to be, with you and or your team, there has to be training, like you said, of getting your team. It's almost like altitude training, right? Where you go up when they do like the Mount Everest.
Hyperbaric training.
When they go to Everest.
Oxygen deprivation.
So like I've never climbed Everest, right? I don't claim to.
What's
Yeah,
wrong with
yeah,
you?
I know. Surprising, I know. But like the way that they do it, from what I understand, is they go up and they get used to a certain area, and then they
Yeah.
go back down, and then they go up a
Right.
little higher, and then they go back down, right? And what they're doing is they're habituating themselves. They're getting their tolerance to that increased. Like that, clinics and teams need to habituate or get conditioned to this idea of what it feels like to have a higher level of confrontation. And people automatically assume confrontation is a bad thing, like that's got a stigma to it. Confrontation is sometimes a very necessary and very important and very pivotal thing to be able to help people make the transformations or breakthroughs that they need in their lives in terms of their health and whatnot. Sometimes it requires their proverbial feet being held to the fire, no pun intended with neuropathy, right? But
Wow, yeah.
but that's true, right? You got to, and so like Lewis said, you got to train your team. And so part of that, think about it in terms of like oxygen deprivation training or whatever, altitude training, right? Getting your team comfortable with a higher degree of confrontational tolerance, being okay with that, being okay to have hard conversations that are necessary conversations, because hopefully what you understand is these conversations are A, motivated by love and desire for what's right for the patient, but B, based and framed around what the patient wants, right? It's created, the confrontation is created by a natural tension that is created, that the patient has created with their own words. I'm not putting pressure on you because you said you wanted this thing. And now my job is to help you, prevent you from self-sabotaging and screwing up you getting that thing that you want.
Yeah.
I want that thing. I don't want to have my feet lopped off because of my neuropathy eventually. But I just don't think I can afford that, or I just don't think I could go through with that, or I don't have the time, or any number of other excuses that people are going to use to camouflage the fact that they're maybe uncertain or afraid or this, that, or the other. You know what I mean? So
Yeah.
anyways, that's my 2 cents.
Those are good sense.
Good.
Dr. Del Rio, I know you're running short on time, and we could go on and on and on and on. But I guess in terms of final words, summary, advice specific to this offer and your success, can you provide some parting words on what you would tell people who might be struggling converting leads or patients or whatever that process is? Provide some of your advice, and hopefully with the goal again, everybody's got their own nuance. There's no silver
Right.
bullet. This is a process. And, what are some hinges that you've identified that make a big leverage point for them?
Well, I think the biggest, right, we talked a lot of different processes and about a lot of things in this short talk here, but what Chad said, he just talked about, is really, if you only did one thing and you didn't have, the practice that you had, all these toys and all this stuff, and the rest of the team that we have, you have to figure out how neuropathy is affecting their life. And one of the questions that we use, usually I use that in the ROF, is in what ways would your life change, or if your would be easier if I could snap my fingers and get rid of your neuropathy? And that question right there gets them speaking. And then that question alone gets you in tune with what they want, and then you can go from there.
Yeah.
And I think that really has changed how our enrollment rate, just by asking them that up front.
I love it. And thank you so much for sharing all of this. I mean, this content is again, it's selflessly provided. You didn't have to share any of this, so we really appreciate it. I think that if any doc, whether they're looking, by the way, that this is giving specific tips on that thermography offer. But
Right.
any doc, you can apply the lessons, the undertones and the principles of what we've been talking about
To
to
any niche.
anything.
Yeah, to any niche, not just neuropathy.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. So I love your approach. Thank you so much for being willing to share your success. And we really appreciate you.
Yeah, definitely, man. I like coming on, and hopefully we do this again.
Absolutely. And to anybody watching, thanks for watching or listening. I suppose we can make this audio at some point.
We could indeed.
Yes, that would be good. Thanks for watching. And I can't wait to do more of these cases closed. So we'll see you on the next video.